Hi, it's Carol Salter here reading from her book. Last chapter we left Harty and Onk waiting for Mac the sentient train to come up with a plan. Let's see how he got on. Chapter 18. The Meeting. The September sun rose over Pengy Station the following morning, the sprinkling of commuters on the platform disregarding its warm arrival. Leaves on the track were evident everywhere, in subtle shades of green and brown and vibrant hues of yellow and red. The sky was blue and cloudless, the ground moist, and a multitude of cobwebs sparkled dewy-like amidst the remaining blackberry and hawthorn shrubs. A huge pile of sodden carpet evolved into the shape of a city troll. Onk sat up and wiped his bleary eyes. He stood bending this way and that, imitating poses of a gymnast warming up. Olympians would have been proud to achieve some of the contortions Onk attained. Above, in the nearby mulberry tree, Harty woke too. He performed his ritual stretching exercises to awaken his wings, a miniature version of Onk if he but knew it. Despite planning to sleep the night on the buffer near Mac, Onk's volcanic snores had driven Harty back up into the sanctuary of the mulberry tree. A deep monotone voice sounded from below, shattering Harty's peaceful moment. "Come on! Come on!" came the call from below. "It's here! Hurry up!" shouted Mac in his low baritone voice. "What's here?" Harty called down from the tree. "Your lift. You want to get to Canterbury, don't you? Well, this old friend of mine goes there every morning." Trundling into the station as Mac spoke came a blackened old diesel locomotive. Gasping and groaning, it was pulling 6 heavy trucks full of black dusty coal. Bringing up the rear were 2 enclosed coaches used for mail and newspapers. Mac saw Harty's doubtful gaze as he took in the worn-out old diesel. "I know he's not much to look at, but he can still work like me," Mac insisted. "You'll have to go now, though. He's leaving soon." Harty thanked Mac, promising to visit him soon. Then, following Mac's instructions, they crossed the tracks, heading towards the slow-moving rear of the coal and post train. The elderly train, welcoming of their company, asked them to board the last carriage containing post and outlined a brief itinerary. Onk wrenched open the carriage door wide with one meaty arm. The locks, of paper chain consistency, in his hands catapulted out onto the rails. The coal train moved at a ponderous rate because it was even older than Mac. It also had to give priority in the station and wait for the newer streamlined passenger train to clear the points, one junction ahead. Points cleared, the ancient coal train was allowed to continue its progress towards Bromley South and the South Eastern rail network. The sluggish train provided ample time for Onk and Harty to clamber aboard their designated carriage. Harty waved goodbye to Mac in the distance, who, despite having his engine turned off, hooted once in cheery farewell. Following their goodbyes, Onk, at Harty's request, shut the huge wooden door, closing out the bright rays of early autumnal sun. Harty and Onk settled back into the dark, musty interior of the enclosed carriage, preparing to relax for the long journey through southeast London suburbs and on into Kent. Onk was adjusting his position, getting comfortable, when a disembodied voice shrieked in the confines of the dim carriage. "Ow! Get off me, you great oaf!" "Who's there?" demanded a frightened Harty, taken to his wings after settling in the opposite corner. Despite being scared, Hearty was determined not to show his fear if he could help it. After all, he had a troll with him, didn't he? "Oh no," came the unexpected reply. "Here we go again." "Here we go again who?" rejoined Hearty in stereotypical fashion. There was no getting away from Onk and Hearty inside the railway carriage. Lenny could have kicked himself for thinking he could hide from them in the tight confines, though he hadn't expected Onk to sit on him. "You're not going to believe this, but here goes. I'm invisible. My name is Lenny." "How do I know you're invisible and not just some tiny thing hiding somewhere in here?" asked Hearty, the incredulity clear in his voice. "If I was hiding somewhere, could I do this?" inquired Lenny in a sarcastic tone. He reached towards Hearty as he spoke. "Ow!" shouted Hearty, more out of surprise than pain, as Lenny tweaked the end of his nose without him seeing. "OK, you're invisible," conceded Hearty, rubbing the tip of his nose. "What are you doing in our carriage?" he demanded, trying to maintain the higher ground. "Your carriage? Your carriage? Since when did the Human Rail Network hand over private carriages to us fairy folk?" replied Lenny, his tone dripping with more sarcasm. "How do I know you're fairy folk and not some invisible human?" rallied Hearty, determined to stay in charge of the conversation. Good point. No one's ever asked me that one before. It could just be that you're really, really stupid, seeing as how you're talking to me, you know, and I can see you both, even though you can't see me." "And what's with you two, anyway? Why are you travelling to Canterbury, and who's after you?" As soon as the words escaped his mouth, Lenny regretted it. He'd let the cat out of the bag and no mistake, and given it to them for dinner too, judging by the collars round Onk's neck. They'd figure out he'd been following them if they were smart. He hoped they weren't. Onk had been watching this interchange with some interest. To him there was only Hearty and Onk in the carriage. His intellect told him someone else was in there and something was happening in front of him, but frankly he'd had enough of this strange conversation Hearty was having, apparently with himself. Onk marched over to Hearty and thumped the air directly in front of him. Hearty leapt backwards out the way, thinking momentarily that Onk had gone rogue. Something heavy hit the floor with a resounding whack and stayed there. A small cloud of dust billowed 2 feet into the air and settled back down where it outlined a humanoid shape. "Thanks, Onk," said a grateful Hearty. He'd gone on the alert when he'd heard what Lenny knew about their plans. Lenny must have been following them before they boarded the train. It unnerved him to think how much this unseen Lenny might have heard. "Talk too much," said Onk, looking at Hearty. Hearty nodded in agreement. "Lenny go," Onk continued. Watching Hearty for affirmation, Hearty nodded again. Onk opened one of the creaky carriage doors, picked up the large bulk of nothingness and lobbed it out onto a sloping grass verge as the old train lumbered past. Hearty wished Lenny a soft landing. He didn't want him to sustain any actual bodily harm. They just met him, or rather heard of him. They didn't need to be making more enemies. Lenny's knowledge of their plans upset and worried Hearty. He sat in silence, brooding over their brief exchange, while Onk sat grinning at his collection of pretties. He reached up to his favourite, a walnut. Prizing it open with meaty fingers, strong enough to kill a small elephant, he tipped out his pretty and smiled down at the precious pink ball of light in his palm. Its sleeping occupant seemed to smile back up at him despite being heavy in slumber. Hearty watched Ankh for some time before drifting off into a doze, lulled into dreamland by the rhythmic chanting of the sentient fossil-carrying train, muttering, "Gone, all gone, gone, all gone." Ankh replaced the cocoon with reverence and closed his walnut shell. He settled it between his crow's foot and Lucky's medallion. He joined Hearty sleeping soon after, dreaming untroll-like dreams. Tonight he danced with fairies like Hearty and grew large troll-sized wings. Taking their hands, he flew among the stars and skipped around the moon before landing in front of the entire assembled fairy nation. He bowed low to the ground before the fairy king and queen. A troll maiden he'd never seen before bestowed her blessing upon him, presenting him with another heart-shaped medallion. She was beautiful, as trolls go, and he was quite smitten with her, remembering her face when he awoke later. Shame it was just a dream, he reflected. Hearty's dream, on the other hand, became a nightmare almost the second he closed his eyes, beginning with Lenny being thrown from the moving train. In his dream, he discovered there were 3 more invisible people in the carriage with them, and Lenny had been the smallest. Ankh and Hearty were hurled from the train in turn straight into a witch's boiling cauldron, while she added eye of bat, wing of fly and bottom of cat. Hearty screamed himself awake as the boiling potion set his precious wings aflame. Ankh was lying across most of the dusty floor, eyes closed, a rapturous expression on his face. How he envied the city troll. Stay tuned for next week. See what happens as they carry on Network Southeast. Goodbye.